Well, let me first greet all of you. And as Tom just said, this conference of the Oasis plan comes at a dramatic moment in history. Hamas announced in a statement yesterday that they had accepted the agreement for a truce with Israel, including the exchange of hostages and prisoners, as was put forward by the Egyptian and Qatari mediators. But within hours of Hamas announcing the success of the hostage truce negotiations, Israeli warplanes pounded targets in the Palestinian city of Rafah. Israel also sent in ground forces to capture the Palestinian side of the crucial border crossing with Egypt. Axios reporter Barak Ravid has been reporting, citing sources with direct knowledge of the development. Last night, around 8 p.m. local time, Netanyahu's office announced that the war cabinet had unanimously decided that Israel will continue its operation in Rafah in order to exert military pressure on Hamas in order to promote the release of the hostages and other goals of the war. Around 10 p.m. local time, Netanyahu's office stated that the ceasefire proposal, far from Israel's necessary requirements, yet they will send a delegation of working-class mediators to exhaust the possibility of reaching an agreement under the conditions acceptable to Israel. As the bombs were falling on Rafah, State Department spokesman Matthew Miller explained that the US cannot support a full-scale attack on Rafah as it would lead to additional loss of life and disrupt the humanitarian aid deliveries. Quote, "We do not support Israel launching a full-scale military operation in Rafah, as the incursion would make it incredibly difficult to sustain the increase in humanitarian assistance that we have been delivering so far." What is happening in Rafah is the beginning of an offensive which threatens to bring a catastrophe for at least 1 million people. They were warned by leaflets and phone calls to go to Khan Yunis, a city which is already completely devastated without any services at all. Quote, "Friends are paralyzed with fear, not knowing if they should stay in other areas of Rafah until the last minute or leave now. This barbaric psychological warfare on top of the ongoing mother curse is absolutely intolerable." This was a statement sent with a message by independent journalist Vanessa Beeley yesterday. Netanyahu had said earlier that he would go through with the offensive if Hamas agrees to the deal or not. And obviously the only force which could stop this is the United States. But President Biden left it with rather inefficient appeals. Now, this is connected obviously immediately to the internal situation inside the United States, because the reason for the very ferocious crackdown on US students, which had protested in over 100 universities, and over 2,000 were arrested, many are kicked out of the universities, reflects the panic of the establishment to lose control over the pro-Israeli narrative. Because according to recent polls, 50% of the young people between 18 and 29 years old believe that Israel is committing genocide. And since this is an election year, the Western establishment and the US in particular fear for their personal political future. It is totally clear that the people in Gaza who are suffering through this incredible situation, and even many Jewish people all over the world and many others are absolutely horrified about what's going on. And they are saying, well, we can't discuss right now an Oasis plan because we have to first stop fighting, we have to have a ceasefire, we have to have humanitarian aid, we have, to save the lives. Or other people are saying, no, we must first have a political solution. Only then can we think about economic development. Now, let me give you the reasons why we think that the Oasis plan must be put on the agenda despite of all the arguments made, or even because of them. Because the situation in Gaza is part of a strategic situation which is right now, as we are sitting here speaking, on the verge of an escalation into a potentially global nuclear war. President Putin, a few days ago, ordered the maneuver of the training of the deployment of tactical nuclear weapons in the southern military district. The aim, obviously, is to guarantee the territorial integrity of Russia in reaction to a whole series of very provocative statements and threats coming from Western officials against the Russian Federation. Now, this deployment of tactical, or rehearsal of the deployment of tactical nuclear weapons is in reaction to the following recent developments. First, Macron, who again, after he said that already some weeks ago on May 2nd in The Economist, repeated that France would send French troops to Ukraine. And he also said that he wants to keep what the policy of France and NATO is towards Russia ambiguous about the French intention and leave Russia guessing. Then the British Foreign Minister Cameron basically said the Ukraine has the right to use the British weapons, including missiles which have far-reaching capability, to strike targets on Russian territory. Then from the United States, US leading Democrat Hakeem Jeffries says, we can't allow Ukraine to lose, and if it looks like they're losing, then we not only have to send money, but also servicemen and women into Ukraine. Now, the Russian Foreign Ministry just informed all NATO countries that the Russian army will identify any modification of the F-16 fighter to Ukraine as a nuclear weapon carrier. If an F-16 aircraft is deployed in Ukraine, Russia assumes that NATO is planning a provocation against Russia, because Russia classifies the aircraft as a dual use, non-nuclear and nuclear. These aircraft have long been the main armament for NATO's joint nuclear mission. Russia's foreign ministry stated yesterday that the UK ambassador Nigel Casey was summoned to the Russian Foreign Office to receive a strong protest over the recent statements by UK Secretary David Cameron. He was told that Moscow considers Cameron's words strong evidence of a serious escalation of the UK deepening involvement in military action against Russia. Casey was warned that Russia could respond to the use of UK weaponry to attack Russia by targeting any UK military facilities and equipment on the territory of Ukraine and beyond. On May 4th, Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova noted that NATO's large-scale steadfast defender drills are a clear indication that the alliance is preparing for a potential conflict with Russia. Right now, NATO is conducting its largest drill since the Cold War, Steadfast Defender, near the Russian border, she said. According to the scenario, using all tools, including hybrid ones and conventional weapons, they are exercising coalition actions against Russia. We have to admit that NATO states are seriously preparing for a potential conflict with us, about which, by the way, high-ranking NATO representatives are openly talking, she said. Various military experts in Europe and elsewhere concur that the Ukrainian army right now is disintegrating. They expect major gains by Russia in the next weeks, maybe even this month, and that the war will be over by the end of the summer. As a consequence, NATO is in panic, because it would mean a complete loss of the military standing after Afghanistan and other wars, ending likewise. And this is why they are engaged in these provocations, and they all put out the line among themselves, oh, we have not to worry because Putin is just bluffing. But NATO troops in Ukraine, British weapons inside Russia, deployment of nuclear weapons in Ukraine, what the F-16 would be, represents an existential threat for Russia. Scott Ritter, the former UN weapons inspector in Iraq, said, if this happens, these troops, French troops and other troops, will be killed immediately, and tactical nuclear weapons will be launched against the decision-making centers, the US bases in Romania, Poland, France, and Germany. Now, the US establishment is at this point obviously convinced that they cannot back down, because then the entire NATO would not be viable any longer. But the Russian military doctrine is very clear. When, from their standpoint, the red lines are crossed, nuclear global war will be the result. I must add to this escalation in Ukraine the potential of the war in Gaza to escalate into a regional war involving Israel and Iran, which also could clearly escalate into a global nuclear war as well, since Russia and China could not tolerate a war against Iran involving US, British, and NATO involvement of NATO member states. Why we have to put the Oasis plan on the agenda now as a vision is the absolute crucial part of an effort to avoid World War III. The Oasis plan conception is a way to understand why only the thinking in a completely new paradigm can get humanity away from the abyss. We have to overcome geopolitics, the idea that the rise of the global south, the BRICS plus, which is already the global majority, representing 70% of the world GDP and 80% of the global population. These majorities of the world are not the enemy of the collective West. We must apply the lesson of the Peace of Westphalia, that if the war continues, nobody will be left alive to enjoy the victory. Therefore, we have to start thinking that we need to have a new global security and development architecture which takes into account the security and development interest of every single country on the planet. I forwarded for this 10 principles as a basis for the discussion of what such a new architecture would imply. In that context, the Oasis plan is the regional expression of such a new architecture. If you look at the map, you see that much of the territory of Southwest Asia is desert. The key to peace, therefore, is the production of large quantities of new fresh water. My late husband, Lyndon LaRouche, already in 1975 proposed the Oasis plan with the idea to build canals between the Mediterranean and the Dead Sea and the Red Sea, and then with the aid of nuclear energy, desalinate large amounts of ocean water, make it available for irrigation, make the deserts green, develop agriculture, forestation, basic infrastructure, new cities, and industries. We have to conceptualize the entire region between India and the Mediterranean, the Caucasus and the Gulf as one integrated region, which then, if it is developed, will become the hub of development between Asia, Africa, and Europe as part of a World Land Bridge program, which is a plan we already developed in 2014 in response to Xi Jinping announcing the new Silk Road, where we developed an infrastructure development plan for the entire globe. Now, there have been, in the last 10 years since, many steps forward in the realization of parts of this plan. For example, China has greened large parts of its territory, actually of the size of the territory of Germany. And they have almost greened 1/3 of the Hop Desert in the Inner Mongolia, which is basically now becoming an economic cluster of desert tourism, food, and photovoltaics. And in the Sekangba, not far from Beijing, thousands of hectares of forest have been restored on the border between Shanxi and Inner Mongolia in the Mawusu Desert. 30% of the desert are now covered with vegetation. Soil erosion has ceased, and the newly reclaimed farmland has reached 1.6 million acres, generating tremendous economic benefit for the local farmers. And the Hop Desert model provides an excellent experience for other countries and regions that face desertification problems. With the most advanced nuclear energy systems now under development in various countries, it will be possible to desalinate large amounts of water of the equivalent of creating entire new rivers. So rather than thinking that one has to fight for narrow strips of land at the ocean, by reconquering the deserts, one can create beautiful landscapes which can resolve the presently seemingly unsolvable conflicts for territories on a totally different plane. South Korean companies are now building what will become the first operational NuScale small modular reactor, so-called SMRs, as part of South Korea's bid to be the world's foremost constructor of SMRs. South Korea is no newcomer to the nuclear power and builds its own reactors like the APR 1400 model, which form the backbone of its fleet of 26 reactors, which will soon increase to 30. It is in the process of fully completing the nuclear power plant in the United Arab Emirates, comprising 4 APR 1400 reactors, 3 of which are already commercial operating, while the last will be online by the end of this year. There is also the concept of the European molten salt fast reactor and various thorium cycle reactor types, which have significantly safety features and are therefore not controversial. We are launching this campaign for the Oasis plan to get an international chorus of forces, of countries, of universities, of think tanks, of individuals demanding its realization. Humanity has come to the most important moment, what German poet Friedrich Schiller called a punctum saliens in a great classical drama. That is the moment where a decision will decide over the entire future of the existence of humanity. A continuation of the same paradigm as we have seen it in the last period will lead to the certain annihilation of the entire human species. If we design, however, a completely new architecture, we will open, hopefully, a new era of mankind. So we will ask all listeners and viewers to join in this battle for the survival of us all. Thank you.
We do understand that the Oasis plan has been intact for a period of time now, but I don't know what are the reactions in conflicting zones when you introduce such a plan to them while they are at the initial stages of liberation or conflict and what have you. What kind of reception do you think that people in warring zones would have when they hear such a plan? I'm just asking you this challenging question because from where I come from, I think, for us it's more important to have political solution first and then thinking about economic development for the sustenance of the longevity of any kind of peace that could, evolve out of the conflict. So I don't know from other areas of conflict whether this plan is being, appreciated as a prelude basically to a political or to a conflict resolution.
Well, I mean, the initial reactions are quite interesting. I mean, we had a previous Oasis plan, I think you participated in, where the ambassadors of Russia, of White Russia, Belarus, and South Africa spoke extremely favorable about this perspective. And in many, many hundreds, if not thousands of discussions the Schiller Institute representatives had in different countries, there is a growing idea that you have to have a complete change in the approach. So I look at it as a building process. Since this is a gigantic change, you cannot expect it to be, in one day, but it's an organizing process where we are trying to mobilize more and more countries and institutions to back up this plan. Now, on this argument that you have to have a political solution first, we have heard that for many, many decades. As a matter of fact, in the United Nations debate, this was always said, you have to have a political solution first, and then you can think about economic development. But that has proven to be wrong, because has it led to peace? Has it led to a political solution? No, it has not. And the argument on the other side is, if you are in the situation like the Palestinian people right now, I mean, the desperation is so enormous that people cannot calm down because they're trying to survive from one day to the next. But if you have an idea how this entire region, all of Southwest Asia, from India to the Mediterranean, from the Caucasus to the Gulf states, would be developed, and we will hear in the course of the seminar very concrete plans, then you inspire the imagination of young people, not only in Palestine but in American universities, in the pro-Palestinian demonstrations, which are not anti-Semitic. They are just reacting to the horrendous situation going on. If you portray such a vision, the countries who are the neighbors of Palestine, of Israel, Jordan, Syria, the Gulf states, Turkey, Egypt, even Iraq, Afghanistan, all of these countries, and the Gulf states, all of these countries are concerned about not only what is going on, but the danger of an escalation of the war. It was, in my view, only the utmost restraint of Iran, that the Hezbollah is not yet involved. The Houthis are sort of doing something, but more or less on their own, I think. But the danger that the war could escalate into an all-out war involving Israel and Iran and its various friendly organizations, and if this escalates, I'm convinced, as many other observers for a long time, that if it comes to a full-fledged war between Israel and Iran, I think we are on the road to World War III, because neither Russia nor China would sit by and see how their ally Iran is being attacked. So we are, and the reason why I mentioned the situation in Ukraine, because you cannot look at a situation in isolation, because the reason why this war danger exists is because the existing world order, which used to be an unipolar world, the neoliberal system, the Western system, which is, which thought that they were the winners of the Cold War, that they thought that history had ended, as Francis Fukuyama had said it at the time. They wanted to keep the unipolar world, and that policy has led to a tremendous backlash, which is now appearing in the form of the emergence of a completely new economic system. And as long as the NATO countries regard Russia and China and the emerging new system as an enemy which has to be fought and has to be suppressed, that is the real driver behind this escalating war danger. So you have to think, what do you do in order to cause a paradigm shift in the thinking of the entire world situation? And as I said, it has to be seen as a part of a new security and development architecture for the whole world in the tradition of the Peace of Westphalia, because the Peace of Westphalia ended 150 years of warfare because all the fighting parties came to the conclusion that if they would continue to fight, nobody would be left to survive. So then they were sitting down for 4 years at the negotiation table, and out of it came the Peace of Westphalia Treaty, which was the beginning of international law. And today, where we are threatened with the immediate danger of a global nuclear war, we have to look at the totality and say, if it comes to such a global nuclear war, there will be for sure nobody left to survive and enjoy the victory, because we all will be dead. And, the idea of such a new security and development architecture based on the development for all, not excluding any country, is the only way how we can solve this present crisis. That is my deepest conviction. And therefore, by focusing on the realization of the Oasis plan for Southwest Asia, where all the neighbor countries have a fundamental interest to bring peace to the region, that is, at the same time, the way to start to tackle the larger strategic question, namely, how can we give ourselves as a humankind an order which allows the survival of mankind at a moment where its very existence is increasingly in danger?
My question would be, what role can, or is there a role that neutral countries can play? Like, my origin is from India, and India has been kind of insisting that, we don't want to be part of it and people should sit down and talk. But could one form a coalition of neutral countries? Could that be also a solution? This is my question to you. Thank you very much.
Yes, that is exactly going in the right direction. Because if you look at the strategic situation between the United States and Russia, it is the worst situation ever. Between the United States and China, in reality, it's going in the direction of confrontation as well. Xi Jinping was just in France and is now in Serbia and Hungary. The relationship between China and Europe is sort of in the middle. So where is the force which could bring stability? Where is the change possible? And I think if you look at the situation, in my view, the only way how you can intervene and de-escalate this present war danger is that the global South, who are the majority of the world population, they must make their voice heard much louder. As President Nehru and President Sukarno already said at the Bandung Conference in 1955, that if it comes to war, the countries of the global South will be affected maybe a little bit later, but they will die as well as a result. And therefore, the global South is an immediate affected party. I mean, the countries of the global South have the absolute right to speak as an equal voice and make their voice heard. And I'm absolutely convinced if the BRICS Plus or a coalition of neutral countries, as you say, would, call in a UN General Assembly special session or some other forum, and basically declare that they insist that there must be a new security and development architecture. There have been many discussions about the needed reform of the United Nations. The Global South is not represented there at all in any efficient and adequate way. But if the Global South would make their voice, if you take all the countries, even the countries who are not immediately involved in the conflict, like Brazil, Indonesia, India, Egypt, South Africa, Nigeria, and some other countries, if they would speak with one voice, I think that there is no way how the United States or Europe or anybody else could oppose it. It's just that thinking that you have to step outside the box when the situation is so desperate as it is right now. Therefore, I think I welcome your consideration and can only encourage that these so-called neutral countries do indeed go in the direction you suggest.
A question for you. Since you have been advocate of the Oasis plan, I would like to hear from you what impediments do you encounter when people try basically to challenge you on this Oasis plan as not in the long-term strategy of creating balance of power in the world or sustaining peace, but on the short term. What are these questions that come often to you as a challenge when you present your plan?
Well, arguments are obviously that, you cannot change the present order because it's the power of the United States which basically backs it up. Or, that it's, what about the financing? Or one of the most arguments is indeed political solution first. Then we can think about economic development. But my late husband, Lyndon LaRouche, when the Oslo Accord was signed, this was a hopeful moment because you had basically the possibility for a peace plan. But my husband said, you have to immediately put construction machines, street building machines into the ground and use shovels and start to build things so that the people on the ground experience the benefit of the economic improvement. This is also what President Nehru did, when he wanted to implement the Green Revolution in India. The peasants, the farmers, were not in favor of it because they had their old habits and old ways. And what Nehru did is he took those farmers who could recognize the benefit of the economic changes of the Green Revolution, which was a real Green Revolution and not like the ecologists in Germany. And he worked with the farmers, and they all of a sudden had bigger harvests, they had more food, more money, they could buy modern equipment. And that example then influenced the others around them, and that's how Nehru could get his reforms through. In the same way, if you start economic development anywhere, even if, you say, let's start with the development of Jordan. Jordan is a country which has one of the fewest water resources on the planet, and they could benefit from such a nuclear-based desalination approach in an incredible way. And then the other countries around, if you go to Dubai or Abu Dhabi, these countries 30 years ago were desert. And after the oil was discovered, they started to invest in irrigation, and you go now along the coastlines of these countries, and there are lush oases. There is an island which used to be completely desert, And now you have vegetation. Some vegetation is already 20, 30 years old and therefore more developed, and you have newer vegetation. It's like a Garden Eden. And even the birds have changed their flight routes, because they discovered that they can land on this island for breeding and resting. So, the idea is you have to enrich the imagination of young people. Young people have to be convinced that it is worth to develop, to become a scientist, to become an engineer, to have children, to have a family, which is unimaginable right now given the present condition. And the Oasis plan is a way that people start to think in terms of the new paradigm. And, the countries who are neighbors, like some of the Gulf states, they have enormous resources. They have sovereign wealth funds. They're investing in things like soccer games and other such things, which may be nice for entertainment, but they're not as existential as this Oasis plan. So we have to convince these countries, that they should help financing this. There's also, the model of Egypt. Egypt has involved a lot of its own citizens in building the second Suez Canal. And Egypt is having an incredible approach, based on development of nuclear energy, of new cities. And, I think it is that idea that you have to change the entire expectation of what the future can bring. And I think, for Israel, the question is also, you have to break the cycle of terrorism, because the idea that you will finish off Hamas, according to many experts, is a complete illusion. Even if you kill the present Hamas leadership, by doing what is being done right now, it's the basis for a new generation of terrorism to come. So there is a fundamental interest of everybody to go in the direction of the Oasis plan. And I think the best thing we can do is to have many conferences like this one, but to organize universities, think tanks, and other fora to discuss the details of this plan, so that the idea of this vision becomes a commonly known idea.
I have one last question. Can you please explain to the attendees here your idea? What is the new international development and security and development architecture?
Yes, as I said, it is modeled on the Peace of Westphalia, which ended 150 years of religious warfare. The 30 Years' War was just the last phase of that. And at that point, you had 1/3 of everything destroyed in Europe, villages, cattle, people dead. So there was a recognition that you had to sit down on the table to find a solution. And they came up with several principles. The first one, that for the sake of peace, you have to take into account the interest of the other. Now, this was an extremely important principle, because if you look in the history of peace agreements, never was a peace possible which did not apply this principle. This is why the Versailles Treaty, for example, which did not take into account the interest of Germany or China, was just a stepping stone to the Second World War. So the next principle of the Peace of Westphalia was, for the sake of peace, you have to stop thinking about what one side or the other did to each other, because in the war, both sides are committing crime. And if you keep listing, you did this to me and you did this to me, it will never stop. You have to put this aside and replace hatred with love. Now that looks like a tall order, but I think the entire lesson of Mahatma Gandhi, of Martin Luther King, of Nelson Mandela, of the South African experience, how to overcome apartheid, there is only that way. You have to stop hating and you have to replace it with love. And the third principle, which was important, was that for the reconstruction of a war-torn area, the role of the state is extremely important, because you cannot count on private interests to do that. This was what led to cameralistic in economic theory. So starting with that reference point, we have to have a new security and development architecture which takes into account the interest of every single country on the planet. That means, it has to include Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, but also the United States, Europe, and obviously all the countries of the global south. So that means we have to have an approach to address the existential problems of humanity. I have proposed 10 principles, which I would suggest you take a look at afterwards. I can only summarize them very quickly. I can only make it very short. The first principle must be absolute national sovereignty for every country, because the only way for the individual to participate in the government is by a sovereign country which has some form of a representative system. And if you have supranational institutions, then the individual is excluded from participation. And that means it cannot function. So national sovereignty is the absolute precondition. Secondly, you have to eliminate world hunger. Presently, there are, half of the world, that is 4 billion, are not enough fed. 2 billion have no access to clean water. Many billions have not enough energy, have not enough, infrastructure. So the overcoming of poverty and underdevelopment is the first principle, which would be very easy because we have all the technologies. It's just that the system is structured in such a way that it does not function. But theoretically, it would be very easy to eliminate hunger in 1 year. Okay, so the second point is we need a universal health system in every single country, because the recently concluded corona pandemic demonstrated that the countries who do not have a health system are, basically at loss and have incredible casualties. Modern health system in every country. Fourth, you need a universal education system in every country, because since science and technology and creative reason are the only sources of wealth, it is universal education of every child and every young person and every adult which is the source of wealth, and therefore the absolute need is that such a universal education is being made available to every child. Then fourth, you need naturally sufficient energy, for which you need high energy flux density energy resources, because there is a correlation between the number of people which can be maintained with the energy flux density in the energy source used for the production, which is why only solar and only windcraft are not functioning, because it only could support maybe 1 billion people on the planet. And this is why you need, for the time being, fossil energy resources, which are much too precious to be burned forever, because they should be used in chemical production and similar things. And naturally, nuclear energy, fourth generation nuclear energy, and then the crash program for thermonuclear fusion technology, which will bring us even one order of magnitude higher, are absolutely crucial. Then you need an infrastructure development, because the infrastructural opening up of all continents is the precondition for industrialization and even for agriculture, because if you don't have a developed infrastructure system, you cannot transport your farm products. You need roads, highways, train systems, fast train systems, ports, bridges, integrated waterways. So this is why the approach of the World Land Bridge is really what is required. So the first 7 of my proposed principles are all on economics, on very concrete measures. And then the 3 last principles I added to show that you need a completely new paradigm in thinking. Because if you don't make the intellectual leap, the jump to think the one humanity first, it all will not function. If you stay on the level of geopolitics, where you say that there is an interest of one country against another country, or a group of countries against another group of countries, it will lead to new wars and conflict, as we have seen it in the past. But if you think that we are the one humanity, and that is the priority, and then you somehow put your national interest in cohesion with that interest of one humanity, you can solve all the problems. And that is the thinking of Nicolaus of Cues, who developed this method of thinking of the coincidence of opposites, to think a higher level first, and then have an ordering principle to approach all problems. And then the last principle is the idea that you have to agree on the image of man, that man is good by nature, and that all evil comes from a lack of development, and therefore can be overcome exactly by development, economically, personally, aesthetically, morally, and in all other possible ways. So the idea that you have to have the idea that man is good is really the most important, because if you look, which religions and philosophies assume that man is good, it's the 3 Mosaic religions, but it's also Hinduism, it's humanism in philosophical terms. And if you look of who thinks that man is evil, it's empires, it's oligarchies who all think that you need an elite which dominates the bad, evil masses, and you have to have a Leviathan as a strong state, strong measures to suppress people. And that is what has to be overcome. So I think that I think we are in history at such a point where I believe since a long time that you will not be able to solve problems on a partial level, on a regional level only, because you have to bring the whole world into order for it to function. So that is the gist of this new security and development architecture. And I think if one starts with intellectuals of all countries to start a dialogue about these matters, we could inspire the governments to implement this.